So this is a video that I've wanted to do for a very long time. Up to this point, though, I've held off because I know a lot of people are probably going to get mad. It is what it is. But as you may know, some people, let's just say, are very passionate about the consoles that they like. And, that's kind of my point. We've all had different experiences in life, and that includes gaming as well. We all have our own favorites, and we're attached to different things for various different reasons. As one such example, one of my favorite games ever made is one that I don't really think a lot of people have even heard about, being Fur Fighters. I have a personal attachment to that game because I used to play it with my family when I was a kid. We had a great time, and I also just like its premise in general. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is that this list is not meant to be the definitive list for best consoles. It's very personalized to myself, and I just kind of want to talk about the consoles that's given me the most joy in my life. Do me a favor, though, go ahead and tell me about your favorite consoles below. I'd actually love to hear that myself. Definitely go make sure to do that. Now, just as a preface, though, I decided not to include the Xbox Series and the PlayStation 5 in this list just because they are incomplete consoles and they still have plenty of life left in them. Maybe I'll reapproach this topic sometime in the future, but with that said, go ahead and grab a snack and drink and enjoy the video. Let's go and get right into it. So at number 15, I actually have a console that a lot of people would probably rank a lot higher, being the PlayStation 1. And I completely understand why. I mean, it was the new kid on the block when it released, and it really changed gaming forever. Sony immediately came out swinging with this brand new console, and well, the rest is history. Like I said before, though, we all have different experiences, and the only reason I don't have the PlayStation 1 ranked higher is because I played most of its games when I was much older. I was only 4 years old when the PlayStation 1 originally released in 1995, so, at this point in my life, I was playing other platforms a lot more. That will make a lot more sense as we get further into the video, but what I'll say here is that when I was a kid, my sister had the PlayStation 1, and that's how I played it. I mostly remember playing a few different Disney games, and then Spyro and Crash Bandicoot, which were both amazing. Both of those games actually ended up being some of my favorite games ever made, so, that all started with the PlayStation 1. But I think a lot of what makes the PlayStation 1 special are some of its more mature games and JRPGs, and those are the ones that I didn't play until I was basically an adult. So while the PlayStation 1 has an absolutely amazing library, I completely agree, I just don't have quite the same affinity with it like some other people do. Number 14, the Super Nintendo. Now, this is where a lot of my first gaming memories come from. I still remember vividly playing through the Donkey Kong Country games with my family, and they're some of my most fond memories in gaming, just period. The music is nostalgic, especially for those Donkey Kong Country games. I still listen to those this day. The gameplay was remarkable. The visuals were mesmerizing. And you know what? For that matter, that's really what stands out to me the most about the Super Nintendo. Out of all of the retro consoles, you can make a very real argument that the Super Nintendo is the one that aged the best because of its use of pixel art. Those games age like fine wine, and that's why we still see games use that art style all of these years later. It's because it's just that good, and the Super Nintendo is filled with amazing, nostalgic, great games that holds up to this day. Number 13, the PlayStation 2. And okay, I know, this one's probably going to be my most controversial pick on this list because I know a lot of people will have this one much, much higher on their list. Now, don't worry, I do have some PlayStation love later in this video, so for you PlayStation fans out there, stick with me. But yes, I mean, the PlayStation 2 to this day is the best-selling console ever made, and I know a lot of people consider it to be peak gaming. But similar to what I said about the PlayStation 1, I just don't really have the same affinity with the PS2 as a lot of other people do. At this point in my life, I was still playing on other platforms more, and a lot of the PlayStation 2 library that I hold in high regards, I actually played on other platforms when I was a little bit older. However, what I will say here is that I really enjoyed the PlayStation 2. At this point in my life, I was going into my tween years. I started to play more mature-rated games like GTA Vice City and San Andreas, which were amazing at the time. We really just had not seen games like that up to this point, but for whatever reason, what I remember remember the most about the PS2 is playing it with my friends after school and during the summer break. We played a lot of games like NBA Street Volume 2, Madden, NFL. We had the Dragon Ball Z Budokai games, and we just had a blast playing through those games. And, the arguments were real, but honestly, I wouldn't trade those memories for the world. Number 12, the Sega Dreamcast. Now, it's just like me to buy into a Sega console just as it dies. But you know what? I loved the Sega Dreamcast when I got it. I still remember exactly where I bought it to this day. I was at Toys R Us on my birthday, and here was this weird console with something called Sonic Adventure 2. I didn't really know much about this platform. I didn't really know much about this game, but it was on sale. It looked interesting, so we picked it up. And boy, am I glad that we did. I was obsessed with Sonic Adventure 2 for such a long time. That, to me, is still my favorite Sonic game all of these years later. And okay, it might not have aged as well as some of the later Sonic games, but all of the different characters that you could play as, there was the Chao Garden, and there was even a kart racing mode that I played with my family. So I absolutely loved that game. And there was a few other games that I played on the Sega Dreamcast that I really had a big attachment to. As I mentioned earlier in the video, this is where I discovered Fur Fighters and also Dead or Alive. That was all on the Sega Dreamcast. And even though I didn't have a huge library on the Dreamcast, everything that I had, I absolutely cherish to this day, including actually the controller itself. Number 11, the original Xbox. Now, this is kind of a strange pick for me to some degree. In all truth, I didn't really play a ton of Xbox games when it first came out, but there's really two specific reasons that I hold the Xbox in such high regards, and that's simply because of Halo and Conquer Live and Reloaded. These are by far some of my favorite games ever made, and they had a huge impact on me when I was younger. I mean, the first time I ever played Halo, it was quite honestly a game-changing experience. Halo had this aura about it to just completely absorb you into a different universe. I played through both Halo 1 and Halo 2 so many times with my friends. We used to sneak out just to play these games together. We would set up an Xbox in an old camper that they had in their backyard just simply so we could play it. But what I remember the most, though, is playing online multiplayer for the first time. I mean, as a kid, I used to think how cool it would be to play with my friends while we're not together in the same home. And Halo, for me, brought that dream to life. I still remember just completely getting destroyed the first time I played. And I just wasn't as good as what I thought I was. And after that, I was like, yeah, I gotta practice up and get better at this game. It was embarrassing. So I was addicted from that point forward, and I did actually get better, and it was just an amazing time in gaming that I have to credit to the original Xbox, Halo, and the introduction of Xbox Live. It was still in its infancy stage, but it brought something new to console gaming that we really had not seen up to that point. Number 10, the Xbox One. So the Xbox One, I will say, is a little bit of a conflicting console for me. A lot of people view the Xbox One as the darkest point in Xbox history, the downfall of Xbox, if you will. And while there is some truth to that for the early part of the generation, I feel like they rebounded, and I do still have some good memories with it. By this point in my life, I was a young adult, and this is really when you start to discover who you are. And my passion for gaming had really grown during this era. I was buying more games than ever before, and a lot of that was on the Xbox One. It's actually one of my biggest library of games, part thanks to the Xbox One X, which is where I played most of the multiplayer games during that generation. I also feel like despite some of the negative stigma that the Xbox One carries, its exclusive lineup is underrated. I mean, I can point to several games that didn't review extraordinarily well, but I still hold in high regards, like Sunset Overdrive or Quantum Break. And then there's these other games that holds a very special place in my heart, including Killer Instinct, the Ori series, and Forza Horizon. I think these games are just flat out amazing. So despite the Xbox One and, yes, some of its flaws, I still really enjoyed it for what it was, and I think the second half of its life cycle was much better with the Xbox One X, and some of its improvements that they made with things like backwards compatibility across all Xbox generations. I do think Xbox, even today, has the best backwards compatibility team hands down. And that all started on the Xbox One. Truthfully, I almost feel conflicted enough to rank the Xbox One a little bit higher because there are some games I really like on this console, especially Killer Instinct, and I do like about a lot of things that they did later in a generation. I think if I was just talking about the Xbox One X and that was it, I'd probably have this one ranked higher, but I do have to kind of consider that early part of the generation as well, and that's why I'm going to go and stick with the number 10 spot despite some of my conflicting feelings. Number 9, the PlayStation Vita. Now, this is a very special console to me that I truly cherish, and that's kind of weird for me to say because, Sony botched the release of this thing in almost every possible way that they could. It's Sony's worst-selling console of all time, it's deemed as a failure, and they practically ditched it right out of the gate. The Vita's first-party support was abysmal compared to their other consoles. But even with all of that, I still love this thing. For as bad as their first-party support was, they did a fantastic job with its hardware. It feels great in the hands, it's got dual analog sticks, which was rare for handhelds at the time, and it just has this beautiful OLED screen that really made games pop. This console still holds up very well because of its hardware, which was a little ahead of its time. The main reason that this console was so special for me, though, is because this was really my introduction for JRPGs, which is actually now one of my favorite genres. For whatever reason, I was just never really into that genre until the PlayStation Vita came along. And then all of a sudden, I tried this game by the name of Persona 4 Golden. It had great reviews online, so I was like, you know what? Let's just go and try it and see what happens. And once I did, I was blown away by that game. And after that, I bought into so many more Japanese games for the PlayStation Vita, such as the classic Final Fantasy series, Danganronpa, the Disgaea games, and so much more. For as much as people like to say the Vita doesn't have games, well, I have a very expansive library for that console. I can also say that it's aged very well. So if you ever get a chance to pick up the PlayStation Vita, I'm talking about the OLED model specifically, I really cannot recommend the Vita enough. Number 8, the PlayStation 4. In a lot of ways, I think the PlayStation 4 is what a lot of modern gamers want from PlayStation even to this day. This is the generation where they really separated themselves from the competition with their first-party lineup and just how popular they became. They became known as the example of how to make single-player, blockbuster, AAA titles because they just had so many hits throughout that generation. Games like Uncharted 4, Spider-Man, and God of War will go down as staples for the genre, and I think that will remain for decades to come. If anything else, Sony solidified their first-party presence on the PlayStation 4, and they took back any grounds that they lost during the generation prior. And that's something that stands out about the PlayStation 4. It's like Sony figured out what their strengths are, and they improved upon their weaknesses as well. The PlayStation 4 controller was vastly better than what they had on the PlayStation 3, and the PS4 was also much easier to develop for. That was a big problem for the PlayStation 3. So not only was the PlayStation 4 the place to play exclusive games, but its third-party support was industry-leading throughout most of that generation, and I think much of the credit goes to Sony just figuring out who they are, and they played into their strengths while also improving on some of their previous flaws. Number 7, the Nintendo 64. Now, I said earlier in the video that I didn't really have as much affinity with the PlayStation 1 and the PlayStation 2, and that's really because I grew up as more of a Nintendo kid. And the Nintendo 64 is one of the first consoles that I really connected with on a deeper level. I mean, okay, sure, you needed 3 hands for its controller. I still don't understand what Nintendo was thinking with that thing, but it's not the controller that makes the console. At the end of the day, it's always about the games, and the Nintendo 64 had so many great games that I fondly remember, and it was also revolutionary for its time. We had never really seen games like Zelda Ocarina of Time before, so it was mind-blowing to see these fully realized 3D worlds, and it wasn't just Nintendo. I mean, we all know how special Nintendo games are, and I can go on and on about games like Mario 64, Mario Party, Star Fox, F-Zero X, and so many more that was on a Nintendo 64, but what I really remember was how special Rare was that generation. Games like Banjo-Kazooie, Diddy Kong Racing, which is still my favorite kart racer of all time. There was Perfect Dark, and there was also GoldenEye. I feel like the pairing of Nintendo and Rare together made for this really special, revolutionary console. They just go hand in hand, and it's kind of too bad that bond didn't continue on. But man, the Nintendo 64 has one of my favorite library of games ever, and what a great start for 3D dimensional worlds in gaming. Number 6, the Game Boy and the Game Boy Advance. Yeah, I'm going to combine both the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance for this one, but truth be told, there is no Jaywood 2010 YouTube channel without the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance. Well, yes, I had played other consoles before these. I feel like my love for gaming started here, with this more personal experience that I could take on the go with me. And let me tell you, Pokemon was my life when I was a kid. I was obsessed with the world of Pokemon, as, well, honestly, many kids were during the 90s. I had to have the clothes, the toys, the cards, and all that started with Pokemon Red and Blue. Seeing all of these monsters that you could catch and train was something truly special that just captured my imagination as a kid. Now, I will say that there's a lot of other games on the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance that I love to this day. And the thing about the Game Boy Advance specifically is that, much like the Super Nintendo, the Game Boy Advance has aged incredibly well because the art style that it used. So I actually still go back and play some of these games from time to time. And you know what? The joy is still there because these games are both fun and timeless. And that's what the Game Boy Advance is filled with. It might not necessarily have the most power, but developers prioritize that fun factor, and it shows 100% crystal clear. Number 5, the 3DS. Now, I actually do still play the 3DS to this day. The 3DS was the last true pocketable handheld, and it's really one of the most unique consoles ever made with its dual screen setup and 3D features. I know not everybody loved its 3D effect, but I always enjoy flipping it on just to kind of see how everything looks, especially on a new 3DS XL where they improved its 3D capability. I mean, some games actually do some pretty cool things with that feature, such as Mario 3D Land as one such example. It's not just about its unique features, though. In my opinion, the 3DS has one of the most underrated library of games. I could go on and on about the 3DS Pokemon games, Bravely Default, Kid Icarus, Mario Kart 7, and the list just kind of goes on and on and on. And for a lot of these games, the thing about them is that you can't play them anywhere else and replicate that experience one-to-one. Because again, it's unique features. We just might not ever see another platform like this again. Now, the new 3DS XL is also a very versatile console. It can play Game Boy Advance games, it can play DS games, and it can even play older platform games if you decide to hack it. Now, that's up to each individual, but it's honestly pretty easy to do. And yeah, I mean, I've been using my 3DS for over a decade now, and that's probably not going to stop anytime soon. Number 4, the Nintendo GameCube. In a lot of ways, I feel like the GameCube was the perfect continuation of what Nintendo did right with the Nintendo 64, but they were able to improve on some of its weaknesses. The Nintendo 64 was 3D games in their infancy stage, but the GameCube better perfected that experience with more timeless visuals. I mean, you can still play a lot of GameCube games to this day, and they still look phenomenal. I think that's a testament to Nintendo's timeless art style and what they were able to achieve on the GameCube. And speaking of timeless, I mean, we have to talk about the GameCube controller. I think that is hands down one of the best controllers ever made, and that's why people still use it to this day. It's a fan favorite within the Smash Brothers community. And when you pair that with all of its great games, I mean, you have Zelda Wind Waker, you have Twilight Princess, some of the best Mario Party games. There was Metroid Prime, Luigi's Mansion, F-Zero GX, Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door, Pikmin, and just so many more fan favorites. There is a reason that people still beg for HD remasters all of these years later, and I think that says a lot about the GameCube and just how good those games were. Number 3, the Nintendo Switch. I think when all said and done, the Switch will go down as Nintendo's best console ever made. And that's simply because it's the perfect combination of everything that makes Nintendo great. For the first time ever, their developers weren't split between a home console and a handheld, thanks to the brilliance of the Switch's hyper design. I think that right there changed everything for Nintendo. And the proof is clear. Their release schedule has been more consistent than ever before with great games year in and year out ever since this thing launched. I mean, even in its swan song year, it still has exciting games like Zelda Echoes of Wisdom and a new Mario and Luigi game. I mean, for that matter, the Switch encapsulates a lot of Nintendo's history. Not only does it have its own exclusive library, which just seems absolutely endless, but it can play a lot of retro Nintendo games as well through Switch Online, and they've even remastered various GameCube games. So it's a very versatile console, and I mean, all I can really say by this point is that I just kind of hope that the Switch successor can continue its brilliance. Number 2, the PlayStation 3. Okay, so these last two entries were very tough choices for me because honestly, my number 1 and my number 2 picks are so close together. It's really more like a 1A, 1B situation to me. But I know a lot of people prefer the PS1, the PS2, or even the PlayStation 4 as opposed to the PS3. Technically, the PS3 was Sony's worst-selling home console. It struggled right out of the gate in large part because of that infamous $600 price tag. And it wasn't exactly the easiest console to develop for either. Sony basically became arrogant, and they made some mistakes. But I'll tell you this much. They bounced back in a way that I don't think that we've seen in any other generation. After that initial launch and some of its backlash, Sony buckled down and they put together, in my opinion, their best and most creative first-party lineup. This is the generation where Sony proved that they have industry-leading talent in their in-house studios. And they pumped out so many great and also, importantly, creative games as well. That's one criticism Sony has faced lately with their modern consoles. They're a lot more formulaic now with their third-person action-adventure games, but during the PS3 era, they had all kinds of different games like Uncharted, they had The Last of Us, Mod Nation Racers, Infamous, Little Big Planet, Puppeteer, and even games like Killzone and Resistance. Yeah, they actually used to make first-person shooters, and the PS3 also has an abundance of PS2 remasters as well. Like I said earlier in the video, a lot of those PS2 games I actually played on the PS3, games like the Ratchet & Clank series, Sly Cooper, there was the Jak and Daxter games, God of War 1 and 2, they also had Shadow of Colossus and Ico. I mean, all of these games are available on the PS3 with better enhanced visuals, and I mean, the PS3 just has a very special library of exclusives, and a lot of these games to this day really can't be played anywhere else, and that's why I hold it in such high regards. I think it has one of the best exclusive lineups of all time. And okay, here we are at the number 1 spot, and like I said, these last 2 spots were very close. It was a tough call, but I had to go with the Xbox 360. While I do prefer the PS3's exclusive library in its totality, I still have a stronger connection with the Xbox 360 because of a couple of games specifically. I'll come back to that in just a second. And then also the social elements that the Xbox 360 brought. The Xbox 360, with the inclusion of Xbox Live, in a lot of ways, changed gaming forever. This was a very special time in gaming where it became a lot more social. Before the Xbox 360, gaming was viewed as a little bit more nerdy, whereas when the Xbox 360 released, people started to play together online. Games like Call of Duty 4 and Halo 3 absolutely exploded in popularity, and it felt like everybody was playing those games on the Xbox 360 with its phenomenally made controller. It easily had the best controller of that generation, and with the included microphone that came with the Xbox 360, we would hop into lobbies or party chats after school, and we would just have a fantastic, great time. To this day, Halo 3, Call of Duty 4, and especially the original Gears of War trilogy are some of my most played games ever made. They're also among my favorite games ever, and in fact, Gears of War is my favorite series of all time, and a big reason why is because not only are they great games, because they are, but also because of those memories that I had online with my friends. That is something that cannot be replicated for me again. And in fact, I met some of my best friends while playing the original Gears of War trilogy. So the Xbox 360 holds a very special place in my heart, and that's why it sits at my #1 spot of all time. There you go, though. This was a very personalized list. This was by no means meant to be definitive or objective, but I hope you all enjoyed going back through memory lane with me. And like I said before, I'd love to hear about some of your favorite consoles as well in the comments below. So do let me hear it. But other than that, if you like these type of videos, do make sure to hit that subscribe button. That way you can get more content just like this. But until next time, peace out.